The county courthouse in Ohio was unusually crowded that morning. Journalists pressed against the wooden barriers, notebooks and cameras ready, while locals filled every available seat, whispering anxiously about what was about to unfold. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that made even the oak-paneled walls seem to lean closer, as though eager to hear the testimony that had brought so many people together. This wasn't just another criminal trial. It was the case everyone in the small town had been. Waiting for Dot at the heart of it all sat a little girl named Emma. She was only 3 years old, her small legs swinging nervously from a witness chair that seemed far too big for her tiny frame. In her lap was a teddy bear, faded from years of hugs and comfort. She clutched it tightly, her knuckles pale, her wide eyes scanning the intimidating faces of strangers. The judge, an older man with thinning white hair and reading glasses perched low on his nose, leaned forward. He adjusted his robe as though the solemn black fabric could anchor him through what was clearly an unprecedented situation. No one in his long career had ever placed a toddler in the witness chair, and the defense had been vocal that such a move was irresponsible. Yet here she was, Emma, a child far too young to articulate the horrors she had endured, but the only one who truly held the key to the truth. The defense attorney smirked as he leaned back in his leather chair, clearly amused. To him, this was a farce. What could a 3-year-old possibly contribute? The jurors, though sworn to impartiality, exchanged subtle glances. Some wore expressions of sympathy, others uncertainty. Many wondered if this would be an exercise in futility. But Emma was not alone. Dot at her side lay Rex, a German shepherd whose size dwarfed her, yet whose posture was calm, protective, and steady. His thick coat gleamed under the courthouse lights, and his amber eyes scanned the room like a silent sentinel. Rex wasn't just any police canine. He had been specially trained for therapy and child protection assignments, making him one of the few dogs trusted in situations like this. He was there to comfort, but also, as some quietly suspected, to reveal truth's words alone could not. The defense lawyer stood and gestured toward Emma with theatrical exaggeration. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he began. "We are being asked to believe that a toddler, barely out of diapers, can testify in a court of law. Surely this is nothing more than a stunt designed to sway emotions rather than present evidence." The judge lifted his hand to quiet the courtroom, but before he could respond, the prosecutor spoke. "Your Honor, Emma isn't here to provide complex testimony. She isn't here to be cross-examined or put through undue trauma. She's here because she has an honest way of communicating truth. She has been working with Rex for months. Together, they have formed a bond, and through that bond, she can tell us what she cannot yet articulate in words." Whispers cascaded through the gallery. "A bond? With a dog?" The jurors straightened in their seats, intrigued despite themselves. The judge rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then nodded slowly. "Proceed," he said. His voice carried both skepticism and curiosity, and even he seemed unsure of what was about to happen. Emma shifted nervously, burying her face briefly in her teddy bear before peeking out at the room. Her mother sat in the gallery, her hands folded tightly, silently mouthing encouragement. Emma's father, a decorated Army veteran, sat beside her, stiff-backed and stoic, though his trembling hands betrayed his inner turmoil. "Emma," the prosecutor said gently, crouching slightly to make eye contact without towering over her. "Do you see Rex beside you?" Emma nodded, her curls bouncing as she gave the faintest smile. Her little hand reached down to stroke the dog's head. Rex responded with a slow wag of his tail, his gaze never leaving her. "Good," the prosecutor continued softly. "Can you show Rex what you practiced?" The defense attorney leapt up immediately. "Objection. This is nothing more than theatrics." "Overruled," the judge said quickly, though his tone betrayed his own eagerness to see what would happen. Let the child continue. The room grew still. Even the faint creak of wooden benches seemed to hush. Emma leaned closer to Rex, her lips barely moving. She whispered 2 tiny words, so soft that only Rex could hear. In an instant, the German shepherd's demeanor changed. His ears snapped upright. His muscles stiffened. He rose slowly to his full height, eyes locking unerringly on the defendant at the far end of the room. A low, menacing growl vibrated from deep within his chest, filling the courtroom with a primal warning that no one dared ignore. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Jurors leaned forward, some covering their mouths in shock. The defendant froze, his smug expression collapsing into a mask of fear as the dog's stare bore into him like a spotlight. The prosecutor remained silent, allowing the scene to unfold naturally. Emma, still clutching her teddy bear, didn't flinch. She simply placed her tiny hand on Rex's shoulder, grounding him, controlling him in a way no adult could have managed. Objection. The defense attorney bellowed, his voice cracking slightly as he pointed furiously at the dog. This is outrageous. You cannot allow an animal to dictate guilt in a courtroom. But the judge didn't gavel for silence. He didn't even blink. Instead, he watched with an expression that was part awe, part disbelief. He had presided over countless trials, heard testimonies from hardened criminals and polished lawyers, but nothing had ever cut through the air with such raw authenticity as this. The gallery erupted in murmurs, reporters' pens flying across notepads, a sound of frantic scribbling filling the silence between Rex's growls. Even the bailiffs shifted uneasily, hands near their belts, though no one dared approach the child or her guardian. Emma's mother wept silently, knowing what those 2 whispered words meant. They weren't rehearsed tricks. They weren't manipulation. They were her daughter's truth, spoken in the only way she could manage without reliving her trauma. The prosecutor finally stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said softly, "you have just witnessed something powerful. This little girl is too young to testify in a traditional sense. But she knows the difference between safety and fear. She knows what happened to her. And Rex Loyal, trained and unshakable, knows how to respond. That was no performance. That was instinct. That was truth." The judge let out a long breath, as though releasing the tension that had seized every corner of the courtroom. "We will proceed," he said firmly, "but let the record show that this court has just observed a unique and compelling demonstration." Emma stroked Rex's fur gently, her small voice whispering something else into his ear. This time, the dog's growl faded, and he sat back down, resuming his calm, watchful presence. It was as if he understood the gravity of the moment, as if he knew his part had been played. The jury, however, would never forget what they had just seen. In that packed courtroom, filled with skeptics, lawyers, and hardened officials. It wasn't legal arguments or evidence displays that shifted the atmosphere. It was a toddler's 2 words, carried on a whisper, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog who chose to listen. And though the trial was far from over, every single person present sensed that the tide had turned. For the first time, the defendant looked afraid, and for the first time, justice felt within reach. For several long seconds, the courtroom seemed suspended in silence, except for the growl. It was low, guttural, primal, and coming from Rex, the German shepherd now standing tall beside Emma. His amber eyes were locked on the defendant, as if no one else existed. The sound reverberated off the paneled walls, making even seasoned officers shift uneasily in their seats. Emma's tiny hand rested firmly on Rex's shoulder. She didn't look afraid. Instead, she leaned forward in her chair, teddy bear still tucked in her lap, and seemed almost certain. Certain of Rex, certain of herself, certain of what she'd just done. The defendant, however, looked like the air had been stolen from his lungs. His smug grin from earlier had vanished, replaced with an ashen face and stiff jaw. His hands fidgeted against the table, fingers drumming nervously. It was the first visible crack in his carefully crafted mask of indifference. "Objection!" The defense attorney roared again, his voice trembling this time. He jabbed a finger toward Rex. "This is prejudicial. This is manipulation. You cannot let an animal dictate the perception of this jury." But the judge didn't gavel for silence. He didn't interrupt. His eyes, sharp behind his glasses, were fixed on Emma. The defense's words seemed to wash over him unheard. The prosecutor took a slow, deliberate step toward the jury box. She didn't rush. She didn't grandstand. She let the silence linger. Let Rex's steady growl underscore every heartbeat in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said quietly, "you've just witnessed something extraordinary. This little girl isn't capable of staging theatrics. She's not here to perform. She's here because she has no other way to tell you the truth. Her words are limited. Her trauma is real. But Rex..." She glanced at the dog, who hadn't moved his eyes from the defendant. "Rex understands her. And Rex has no agenda. He only reacts when she feels danger." The defense attorney barked a laugh, trying to mask his unease. "Oh, come now. You expect us to believe a dog can testify? That a toddler whispering nonsense suddenly counts as evidence?" A ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching across notepads. A few jurors exchanged wary looks. One older man leaned forward, his brow furrowed, as if trying to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with everything he thought he knew about courtrooms. The prosecutor didn't flinch. "This is not testimony," she clarified. "This is demonstration. We're not asking Rex to convict anyone. We're asking you to recognize that a child too young to explain her pain has found a safe way to express it. This was not rehearsed. This was instinct." Emma shifted slightly in her chair, hugging her teddy tighter. She glanced at her mother, who mouthed the words, "You're brave." Emma nodded, then turned her gaze back toward Rex. The German shepherd's growl subsided as Emma stroked his fur, but his eyes remained fixed on the defendant, unblinking, unwavering. The prosecutor crouched again, her voice soft enough for only Emma and the jury to hear. "Emma, sweetheart, would you like to show Rex again?" Emma hesitated, chewing her lip nervously, then leaned down once more. Two whispered words slipped from her lips. Instantly, Rex's ears shot up again, body tightening like a coiled spring. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply growled louder this time, the vibration rumbling across the wooden floorboards. The defendant flinched visibly, shifting in his seat, his lawyer leaning away uncomfortably, as if the growl was aimed at him too. "Your Honor." The defense attorney shouted, now red-faced and sweating. "This is unconscionable. This is..." The judge raised his hand, finally silencing him. "Sit down, counselor." His voice was calm, but carried an edge of authority that brooked no argument. The defense attorney's mouth opened as if to protest further, but one look at the judge's eyes made him sink reluctantly back into his chair. The jury couldn't take their eyes off Emma. What had started as skepticism was shifting into something else: curiosity, even belief. They weren't watching a show. They were watching a child find her voice through a dog's instincts. One juror, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched low on her nose, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Another, a younger man in a suit, leaned back slowly, lips pressed together, as though suppressing his own reaction. The prosecutor straightened, addressing the jury again. "Emma doesn't know how to fabricate. She doesn't know how to manipulate. She only knows how to survive. And Rex is her protector, her translator. If she feels unsafe, she whispers two words, and Rex reacts. You've just seen that. Twice, without prompting, without trickery. The judge exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. Even he looked shaken, as though the courtroom had slipped into a space outside traditional law. "The record will reflect the demonstration," he said finally, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Proceed." The prosecutor nodded and turned back to Emma. "Sweetheart, you did so well." "Thank you." Emma smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing. She tucked her teddy bear under her chin and rested her head briefly against Rex's neck. The German shepherd calmed instantly, the growl fading into silence. He licked her hand once, reassuring her as much as himself. Across the room, the defendant sat rigid, his face pale. For the first time since the trial began, his mask had slipped completely. He avoided the dog's gaze, staring down at the table as though the wood grain itself might offer him escape. The gallery began buzzing again. One reporter muttered under his breath, "This is history." Another whispered, "It's like the dog is testifying for her." Emma's father sat stone still, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the bench, so tightly his knuckles whitened. He had survived firefights in foreign lands, but this simple whisper and the growl of a loyal dog was more powerful than any weapon he had ever carried. His wife pressed her hand to his arm, her face streaked with silent tears. The defense attorney tried to rally, clearing his throat loudly. "Members of the jury," he began, his voice quivering slightly, "you must not be swayed by tricks. Dogs can be trained to respond to cues. This is nothing more than smoke and mirrors." But the jury's expressions told another story. They had seen Rex ignore the buzzing phones, the shuffled papers, the murmurs in the gallery. He had responded only to Emma's whispers. Not once had he been distracted. Not once had he faltered. The prosecutor seized the moment. "If this were a trick," she said firmly, "Rex would have reacted to anything. But he didn't. He only reacted to Emma, because her words matter. And she matters." The courtroom held its breath again. Emma tilted her head, her curls brushing against Rex's ear. She whispered something, not the command this time, but a soft, "Good boy." Rex's tail thumped once against the wooden floor, a sound that echoed like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The jury smiled faintly. Even the judge allowed himself the smallest nod. The defense lawyer slumped in his chair, muttering something under his breath. The defendant, however, sat frozen, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles quivered. He didn't look at Emma. He didn't look at Rex. He simply stared at his hands, as if hoping the world would forget he was there. But the world had just seen too much to forget. The prosecutor returned to her table, her expression calm, but inside her chest, her heart thundered with adrenaline. She knew what this meant. The jury had witnessed something more powerful than cross-examination, stronger than any exhibit or piece of evidence. They had seen a child's truth, delivered in the form of a dog's instinctive response. And as the judge called for a brief recess, the gallery erupted in noise, reporters rushing for the doors, spectators whispering, officers exchanging glances. But one fact remained clear. The growl had changed everything. And from this moment forward, the trial would never be the same. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with whispers during recess. Reporters leaned over paper cups of coffee, their pens scratching furiously at notepads, replaying the image of Rex's growl in their minds. Some muttered that it was theatrics. Others insisted they had seen truth itself, embodied in the loyalty of a dog. Even seasoned attorneys, men and women hardened by decades of trials, admitted they had never experienced anything like it. But for Emma's mother, the noise of the courthouse faded into a dull hum. She sat in a quiet corner, clutching her phone, her hands trembling. She wasn't thinking about the headlines or the legal debates. She was thinking about her daughter, how far she had come, how fragile she still was, and the secret journey that had led them here. Months earlier, Emma hadn't spoken at all. After the night that shattered their family, she'd retreated into silence, curling into herself whenever strangers entered the room. Doctors called it trauma-induced mutism. Counselors tried play therapy, dolls, art, even puppets. Nothing broke through. The only sounds Emma made were small whimpers in her sleep and the occasional whispered "Mama." Her father, a decorated Army veteran who had faced firefights and landmines, felt helpless. He could dismantle a weapon in 30 seconds, navigate hostile terrain under fire, but he couldn't coax a single sentence from his daughter. He paced their living room at night, fists clenching, wondering if he had failed her. Then came Rex. He wasn't just any German shepherd. Rex was part of a specialized canine program piloted by the FBI in collaboration with local law enforcement. He had been trained not only in traditional police work, but also in providing therapy for traumatized children. Unlike most canines south, Rex was gentle, patient, and remarkably attuned to emotion. His handlers often said he could sense fear before a human eye ever noticed it. The first time Emma met Rex, she had clung to her mother's leg, refusing to move. The big dog lay down quietly on the floor, resting his head between his paws. He didn't make a sound. He didn't move closer. He just waited. Minutes passed. Then, almost imperceptibly, Emma took one step toward him. Another. She crouched down, reaching out a trembling hand, and touched his ear. Rex's tail wagged once, slow and steady, as though acknowledging her bravery. From that moment on, Emma began to change. She didn't speak, not yet, but she smiled. She started bringing her teddy bear to Rex's training sessions, laying it beside him as though introducing her best friend to a new protector. She sat beside him during story time, her little fingers tangled in his fur as agents read books aloud. Slowly, Emma's fear began to dissolve, not because the world was safe, but because Rex made it feel safer. That the breakthrough came weeks later. Emma's therapist, desperate to give her a voice, suggested using Rex as a bridge. If Emma felt afraid, she could whisper to him. No pressure to talk to adults. No expectation of explaining things she wasn't ready to relive. Just a secret shared with a dog who never judged, never pushed. That's when agents introduced the command. 2 simple words, a phrase, chosen because it was easy for a child to remember, yet powerful enough to cue Rex into action. They practiced gently. Emma would whisper the words, and Rex would respond with a growl or a shift in posture. Each time, Emma would giggle nervously, then hug him tightly. The more she practiced, the more confident she became. To outsiders, it looked like a game. To Emma, it was power, the kind she hadn't felt since her world had been turned upside down. Her father had watched those sessions from the corner, his broad shoulders tense, his chest heaving with silent emotion. He'd seen soldiers break under less pressure, yet here was his little girl, whispering into a dog's ear, reclaiming her voice one syllable at a time. He had to step outside more than once, wiping his eyes where no one could see. By the time the trial approached, Emma still couldn't tell her story in sentences. But she didn't have to. She had Rex. She had her command. And she had the courage to whisper. Back in the courtroom, as recess ended and people filed back into their seats, the jury returned with different expressions than they'd worn that morning. Curiosity lingered in their eyes, but so did something stronger: respect. They had seen Emma's bond with Rex, and no matter how the defense tried to spin it, the image lingered. The prosecutor rose, addressing the court. "Your Honor, we would like to provide context for what the jury just witnessed." The defense attorney leapt to his feet. "Context? You mean justification for a stunt?" "Sit down, counselor," the judge snapped, more sharply than before. The defense attorney hesitated, then obeyed, his face flushed. The prosecutor turned back to the jury. Emma was never supposed to testify in the traditional sense. "She's 3 years old." She cannot describe events like an adult. But she has a bond with Rex that allows her to communicate when she feels unsafe. That bond has been cultivated over months, not minutes. What you saw today wasn't training. It was trust. And trust, she paused, letting her words hang in the air, cannot be fabricated. She called an FBI handler to the stand, a woman in her 40s with a calm presence and years of experience with K-9 units. The handler explained the program, how Rex had been trained, and how Emma's bond with him had developed. She detailed the countless hours spent earning Emma's trust, the sessions where Emma whispered into Rex's ear, and how the two words had been chosen for their simplicity. Is Rex capable of responding to just anyone? The prosecutor asked. The handler shook her head firmly. No, he is conditioned to respond only to Emma. We've tested this repeatedly. Volunteers tried giving the same command. Rex ignored them all. Only Emma's voice triggers the response. The jury scribbled notes, their eyes flicking between the handler, Emma, and Rex. The defense attorney sat rigid, flipping through his notes with increasing frustration. The handler continued, her voice steady. This is not a trick. This is not theater. This is a partnership between a child and a dog. And in my professional opinion, what you witnessed was the most honest communication Emma is capable of right now. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs again. The defense attorney rose slowly, preparing for cross-examination, but his earlier bravado seemed diminished. The image of Rex's growl still lingered too heavily in the air. Emma, oblivious to the legal chess match unfolding around her, stroked Rex's fur absent-mindedly, humming softly to herself. For the first time in months, she looked calm, safe. Strong. Her father watched from the gallery, his heart swelling with pride and pain all at once. He thought of the night he first held Emma in the hospital, her tiny fingers gripping his thumb. He thought of the nights he had wondered if she would ever speak again. And now, here she was, whispering to a dog, changing the course of a trial with nothing more than 2 words. The defense tried to poke holes in the handler's testimony, suggesting Rex could be manipulated, that Emma might have been coached. But the handler didn't flinch. This isn't about coaching. This is about survival. Children who can't find words still find ways to speak. Emma chose Rex. That's not coaching. That's courage. The judge leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable, but inside, even he felt something shift. He had doubted this approach. He had thought it unorthodox, maybe even inappropriate. But now, watching Emma's small fingers tangled in Rex's fur, he wasn't so sure. When the recess ended and proceedings continued, one thing was clear. The jury no longer saw Emma as a fragile child too young to matter. They saw her as a voice small, trembling, but amplified by the growl of a dog who would never betray her. And for the first time, the defense knew their case was in real danger, because no cross-examination, no legal strategy, could erase the image of a toddler whispering 2 words into a dog's ear, and the truth that followed. The gavel struck hard against the wooden block. Order in the court. Judge Holloway barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. But order was nowhere to be found. The scene had unraveled the moment Rex's handler stepped down from the witness stand. Whispers erupted from the gallery. Reporters scribbled frantically, and even the jury exchanged uncertain glances. The case that had seemed straightforward to the defense that morning was now spiraling into uncharted territory. Emma sat quietly in her chair, clutching Rex's ear as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The dog leaned against her leg, his calm presence at odds with the storm around them. She hummed softly, oblivious to the grown-up chaos, but her small voice carried through the silence whenever the courtroom fell quiet enough. The prosecutor, Dana Whitmore, leaned forward on her table, sensing momentum shifting in her favor. For weeks, she had worried that Emma's testimony would collapse under the weight of her trauma. But now the jury had seen something raw, undeniable. Emma had spoken in the only way she could, and Rex had answered. The defense attorney, Randall Pierce, slammed his briefcase shut and stood abruptly. His face was red, his hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. "This entire display," he thundered, "is prejudicial. It plays on the emotions of the jury rather than the facts of the case. A dog growling on command is not evidence. It is theater." Judge Holloway fixed him with a sharp glare. "Sit down, counselor." But Pierce didn't sit. He took a step forward, his voice booming. "Your Honor, if this circus continues, my client cannot possibly receive a fair trial. We are here to judge testimony, not animal tricks designed to sway sentiment." The jury shifted uncomfortably, their eyes bouncing between the judge, the attorney, and the little girl sitting serenely beside the German shepherd. Dana Whitmore rose slowly, her movements deliberate, her expression cool. "With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, what this jury witnessed was not theater. It was communication. Emma cannot testify like an adult. That doesn't mean she should be silenced. She has a voice, and it is this bond with Rex." Pierce sneered. "A bond or conditioning? For all we know, she's been coached to whisper a phrase and make the dog react. How convenient for the prosecution that an animal is now acting as a witness in a federal case." The gallery gasped. Emma's mother's hands balled into fists in her lap, her knuckles whitening. The father shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked as if it might crack. Judge Holloway raised his gavel again. "Enough, Mr. Pierce. I'll remind you that disparaging a child in this courtroom will not be tolerated." But Pierce pressed on, his desperation showing. "Your Honor, we move for a mistrial. This proceeding has been contaminated by theatrics that no reasonable court should allow." The words hung heavy in the air. A mistrial. It was the nuclear option, one that could set the case back for years. The judge didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Emma. She was tracing circles on Rex's back with her finger, humming her little tune, blissfully unaware of the legal minefield exploding around her. Holloway's stern face softened just for a moment. He had presided over hundreds of cases, seen hardened criminals cry, seen victims falter, but never had he seen something like this. A child finding her courage in the growl of a dog. Finally, he spoke. Motion denied. His gavel came down hard. "This evidence will stand." The gallery erupted, half gasps, half applause. Reporters nearly fell over themselves racing for the door to phone in the update. The jury sat straighter, their eyes locked on Emma, as though reassessing everything they had seen. Pierce sputtered, "Your Honor." "I said denied, counselor," the judge thundered. "One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt." Pierce fell silent, his face a storm of rage and frustration. Dana suppressed a smile. She knew the defense had just lost more than their motion. They had lost credibility. She stood, smoothing the front of her suit. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call Emma's mother to the stand." The bailiff swore her in, and Emma's mother, pale but determined, took her place. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "Mrs. Collins," Dana began gently, "can you tell the court what Emma's life has been like since that night?" Her voice quavered but grew steadier with each word. She described Emma's silence, her nightmares, the way she had clung to her teddy bear until its seams began to fray. She told the jury about the endless doctor visits, and nights Emma refused to sleep in her own bed, and the heartbreaking fear that her daughter might never speak again. "And when did that begin to change?" Dana asked softly. "When she met Rex," Mrs. Collins said, her voice breaking. She turned to look at her daughter, who smiled faintly from her chair. "That dog gave her something we couldn't. Safety. Courage. He made her believe she wasn't alone." Dana let the words linger before asking, "And the phrase? The command she whispered today?" Mrs. Collins nodded. "It's the only thing she'll say when she feels afraid. It's not a trick. It's her way of telling the world, I'm not safe." Without Rex, she couldn't say it out loud. The jury's eyes glistened. A few jurors dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Randall Pierce leapt up for cross-examination, his tone harsh. "Mrs. Collins, isn't it true that you've been working closely with law enforcement for months to prepare your daughter?" Mrs. Collins lifted her chin. "We've been working to help her heal. That's not preparation. That's survival. Isn't it true," Pierce pressed, "that you encouraged her to use this command in court to sway the jury?" Her eyes blazed. "I encouraged her to be brave. That's all. Emma doesn't care about juries or verdicts. She cares about feeling safe." The courtroom went still. Even Pierce seemed rattled by the conviction in her voice. He muttered something about irrelevant theatrics and sat down, defeated. Judge Holloway called for order again, his voice weary. He knew the trial had crossed into uncharted territory. He also knew something else. The jury was no longer listening to the defense. Their hearts were with Emma. As the day wound down, reporters gathered outside the courthouse, their microphones raised like weapons in a battlefield of sound. Headlines buzzed through the city. "Toddler's dog command shakes courtroom." Some outlets called it groundbreaking. Others called it outrageous. But everyone agreed it was unforgettable. Inside, Emma's father finally exhaled. He had been holding his breath since the morning session. He leaned over to his wife and whispered, "She's stronger than both of us." Double quotes. Mrs. Collins squeezed his hand. "She always was." Meanwhile, Emma curled up against Rex, drifting into sleep as the German shepherd stood guard. The courtroom still hummed with tension, the legal battle far from over. But in that moment, she looked peaceful, and in the silence that followed, one truth became clear to everyone in that room. This case would not be remembered for its motions or objections. It would be remembered for a 3-year-old girl, her whispered command, and the dog who roared for her when she could not. The courtroom settled into an uneasy quiet as the morning session resumed. Outside, the autumn sun cut slanted rays across the courthouse steps, painting the grand building in gold and amber. Inside, though, no sunlight could match the tension or the awe that had gripped the room since Rex's growl. Emma sat perched on the edge of her seat, clutching her teddy bear tightly against her chest. Her little fingers brushed the thick fur of Rex, who lay patiently at her side. His golden brown eyes, sharp and intelligent, followed her every subtle movement. He was more than a dog in that moment. He was her voice, her shield, and her unwavering protector. The jury, still absorbing the events of the previous day, was attentive now in a way that made the walls of the courtroom seem almost sacred. This was no longer just a trial. This was a stage for courage, for trust, and for an instinctual communication that defied traditional boundaries. Dana Whitmore, the prosecutor, rose carefully, her shoes clicking lightly against the polished floor. She approached the jury slowly, her expression calm but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you witnessed yesterday was not a stunt. It was not theater. It was the purest form of honesty that a 3-year-old can offer. Emma cannot yet describe her trauma in words, but she can communicate truth through her bond with Rex." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. The jurors leaned forward, pens poised over notebooks. "One more time," Dana continued, "you will see the power of that bond demonstrated. Not for your benefit, but because Emma's safety requires it." The defense attorney, Randall Pierce, slammed his briefcase on the table, his face red with indignation. "Your Honor, I object. This is manipulative. Emotional appeals have no place in a court of law. My client is being prejudiced by these theatrics." Judge Holloway, who had grown increasingly impatient with Pierce's outbursts, adjusted his glasses and raised a hand. "Counselor, sit down. Your objections are noted, but this court will proceed." The courtroom fell silent. Even the bailiffs seemed to hold their breath. Emma shifted in her seat and glanced at Rex. She whispered softly, at two words she had repeated before. Almost immediately, Rex's ears pricked. His stance shifted, muscles taut, eyes locking once again on the defendant. But this time, something subtle but unmistakable occurred. His tail stiffened, a low growl vibrating in his throat, and he stepped closer to Emma, almost shielding her with his body. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the reporters ceased their scribbling, sensing that this moment was extraordinary. Pierce sputtered, trying to interrupt, but Dana raised a hand to silence him. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said gently, "you are seeing what Emma is capable of. She cannot testify like an adult, but she can whisper the truth, and Rex will respond. This is the most honest evidence you will witness in this case." The defendant, who had maintained a veneer of composure since the trial began, now sat rigid. Sweat beaded at his temple, and his eyes darted nervously between Emma and Rex. The arrogance he had worn like armor seemed to melt under the quiet authority of a child and a dog. Mother leaned forward in her seat, hands clasped tightly, whispering words of encouragement. "You're safe, honey. You're doing so well." Her father, stoic yet trembling slightly, tightened his jaw. He had faced life-or-death situations overseas, but this, the weight of justice resting on his daughter's tiny shoulders, was unlike any battlefield he had ever encountered. The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury. "Consider this. Rex has been conditioned to respond only to Emma. Volunteers, strangers, anyone else attempting the same command, they are ignored. Only Emma triggers him. That is not theatrics. That is trust. That is instinct. That is the truth she can give at 3 years old." Pierce rose again, flustered. "Objection. This is speculation. You cannot claim what a dog feels or understands." Judge Holloway let out a sigh. "Counselor, the objection is overruled. The record will reflect that Rex's responses are consistent and observable." Emma looked at Rex and whispered again. This time, her voice was firmer, more confident. The dog's response was immediate, a low, steady growl directed at the defendant, ears forward, tail stiff. He moved slightly, shifting his body to place himself between Emma and the accused. A living shield. Gasps echoed through the gallery. The jury's attention was riveted. Even the most skeptical jurors couldn't deny what they saw. The reaction was precise, deliberate and unmistakable. Dana spoke again, softer now, letting her words wash over the room. "Emma doesn't understand legalities. She doesn't know the charges or the evidence. She's a child, but she knows fear. She knows danger. And she has a way of communicating it safely with Rex." The courtroom felt suspended in time. The defendant's face drained of color as he realized the depth of the courtroom's gaze. He was surrounded not just by the law, but by instinctive truth made manifest through a dog's loyalty. "Your Honor," Pierce finally managed, his voice tight, "this is prejudicial. It should not be considered in deliberations." Holloway shook his head. "Noted. But the jury will decide the relevance and weight of what they've seen. We will continue." The prosecutor gestured for Rex to settle at Emma's side, but the dog remained alert, muscles still taut, eyes glimmering with quiet intelligence. Emma rested her hand on him again, gently patting his head. She whispered something almost inaudible, a small expression of gratitude. Rex responded with a subtle wag of his tail, a silent acknowledgement that she had been brave. The jury watched with rapt attention. Every subtle movement, every glance, every growl, every touch between Emma and Rex carried meaning that words could never fully capture. They were seeing a truth expressed in the purest form. Instinct, loyalty, courage, and communication beyond language. The defense tried one last tactic, calling a witness to testify that dogs could be conditioned to respond to subtle cues. But the handler returned, calm and authoritative, demonstrating that every test with strangers had resulted in no reaction. Only Emma could trigger Rex's response. The jury's notes grew heavier with each passing minute, the evidence clear even without words. Outside the gallery, reporters whispered to each other. "Did you see that?" One said. "The doggy wasn't just trained. He knew." Inside, Emma's small voice hummed softly as she leaned against Rex. She wasn't aware of the magnitude of what she had done. She only knew she was safe. That was enough. And yet, that safety had begun to tilt the scales of justice in a way no one expected. Dana Whitmore finally returned to her seat, glancing once at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen how Emma communicates her truth. You have seen the bond she shares with Rex, and how instinct and courage can speak louder than words. Consider carefully what you have witnessed. This is not manipulation. This is bravery in its most untainted form." The defendant, pale and trembling, avoided all eye contact. His attorney slumped in defeat, realizing that the momentum had irrevocably shifted. The court would no longer be a battlefield of legal technicalities. It was now a stage for truth expressed through courage, loyalty, and the instinct of a dog who refused to be deceived. Emma's mother breathed a sigh of relief, tears streaking her cheeks. Her daughter, finally, had found a voice. And the jury, perhaps unconsciously, had heard it. As the judge adjourned for lunch, the tension lingered like a tangible weight in the air. Outside, reporters began tweeting and recording, cameras flashing. Headlines began forming. "Toddler and dog change courtroom forever." 3-year-old whispers truth. Jury stunned. Inside, Emma hugged Rex tightly, humming her quiet song, unaware of the chaos she had caused or the history she had made. Her father brushed a curl from her face, a rare, soft smile breaking through his stoicism. "You did it, kiddo," he whispered. "You did it." And for the first time in weeks, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The trial was far from over, but the first seeds of justice had been planted. Because in that courtroom, it was no longer just about evidence, testimony, or motions. It was about a child who found her courage and a dog who answered, changing the course of the case forever. The courtroom reconvened after lunch, but the atmosphere was different. The jurors returned with a quiet intensity, whispering among themselves before the bailiff's gavel struck. Everyone knew that what had happened with Emma and Rex had left an indelible mark. The trial was no longer just about law and procedure. It was about truth, instinct, and the unshakable bond of a child and her dog. Emma sat upright, teddy bear tucked under one arm, her other hand resting lightly on Rex's head. He remained alert, ears swiveling at the slightest sound, muscles coiled like a spring. The dog's presence radiated confidence, but it also carried a subtle warning, Emma's warning one that had not been ignored by anyone in the room. The defendant shifted in his seat. He was pale, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the courtroom. His lawyer, Randall Pierce, shuffled papers nervously, muttering under his breath. The veneer of arrogance that had dominated the morning session had long since crumbled. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We will proceed with testimony from the next witness." Dana Whitmore, the prosecutor, rose calmly, her eyes sweeping the room. "Your Honor, with permission, I would like to call Detective Marshall to the stand." Detective Marshall, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years in the field, approached. His reputation for thoroughness and integrity preceded him, and the courtroom took notice as he was sworn in. "Detective," Dana began, "you were present when the initial statements were taken from the child, Emma Collins." Can you tell the court what you observed? Marshall cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. From the beginning, Emma was nonverbal. She did not respond to traditional questioning. But she responded to her dog, Rex, when she whispered the command we had established during therapy sessions. Rex's posture shifted, his growl was audible, and his focus became unwavering. The jury leaned forward, captivated. Even Pierce frowned, realizing that every word confirmed the unshakable bond between Emma and Rex. Dana continued. Detective, was there any chance that Rex's reaction was coincidental or prompted by the handlers? Marshall shook his head. Absolutely not. Rex has been tested extensively. Only Emma can trigger this reaction. Volunteers, strangers, even law enforcement personnel using the same command were ignored. This is a trained response, yes, but one uniquely tied to Emma. It is consistent and observable. The gallery murmured quietly, reporters scribbling furiously, capturing every word. Pierce jumped to his feet, voice rising. Detective, are you saying the child influenced the dog? That a toddler can somehow control the behavior of a fully trained canine? Marshall remained calm. I'm saying the child communicates with the dog in a way no adult could replicate. It is instinctive, yes, but it is also an established pattern we have observed multiple times. It is a reliable indicator of her perception of threat. The courtroom was tense. The jurors scribbled notes, exchanging subtle glances. For the first time, the defense attorney appeared uncertain. Dana turned to the jury. What Detective Marshall is confirming is exactly what you witnessed yesterday and today. Emma, though young and nonverbal, has a way of communicating her perception of danger. That is precisely why we are relying on her bond with Rex as evidence of the defendant's presence and threat. Emma shifted slightly, brushing her fingers through Rex's fur. She hummed softly, almost as if she understood the gravity of the moment, even at her tender age. Rex's ears twitched. His amber eyes locked on the defendant, unwavering, alert, protective. Pierce leaned toward his client, whispering frantically, "We can't let this continue. The jury has seen too much. They're biased. They've been swayed by theatrics." The defendant shook his head slightly, his hands clenching and unclenching in nervous agitation. His bravado had completely disappeared, leaving only fear, guilt, and desperation. Dana stood, taking a deep breath, before turning her focus to the jury again. Members of the jury, consider what you've seen. This child cannot be coached to produce the results Rex displayed. This is instinct. This is truth. And now, we will provide direct evidence tying the defendant to the acts in question. The next witness was called. Officer Lee, a local patrol officer who had responded to the initial 911 call. He walked slowly to the stand, taking care to meet the eyes of the jury. "Officer Lee," Dana asked, "what did you observe when you arrived at the scene?" Lee's voice was steady, but filled with the weight of experience. "When we arrived, the victim, Emma's mother, was distraught, and Emma was hiding in a corner. The defendant was still present. I immediately noticed that Emma began whispering something. The dog Rex reacted immediately, positioning himself between her and the suspect. His growl was audible, and the suspect's demeanor changed. He became agitated and tried to distract us. The jury's eyes widened. The words painted a vivid picture. Emma's instinctive communication with Rex was not only real, but also documented by law enforcement." Pierce stood abruptly. "Objection. Speculation. You're allowing assumptions to influence testimony." Judge Holloway's gavel struck decisively. "Overruled. The officer is describing first-hand observations. Proceed." Lee nodded and continued. "I confirmed the details with other officers. Multiple witnesses noted the same behavior. Emma whispered the command. Rex reacted, and the defendant's behavior indicated awareness and guilt. It was consistent and observable. The jury leaned in, their pens furiously marking notes. Every detail added to a narrative they could not ignore. Dana returned to the table, her voice calm but commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from multiple credible sources. Trained law enforcement, canine handlers, and eyewitnesses. All confirm what you have seen with your own eyes. Emma's whispered command and Rex's reaction are a truthful, instinctual measure of danger and threat. Emma looked at Rex, brushing her fingers along his back. Her small humming filled the silence briefly, comforting both herself and the dog. Every juror's eyes were locked on her now, witnessing bravery beyond her years. Pierce's objections grew weaker with every passing moment. He had no more theatrics to counter, no witnesses to diminish Emma's credibility. The courtroom, once a stage for legal arguments, had been transformed into a living testament to instinct and courage. Finally, the prosecutor motioned for Rex to perform the demonstration one last time. Emma whispered her two-word command. The dog immediately stiffened, growled low, and positioned himself protectively in front of her. Every eye in the courtroom followed. Every juror held their breath. Every heartbeat seemed amplified. The defendant's face was pale, eyes darting from Rex to the jury, then back again. The tension was suffocating. The realization that the child and her dog were unshakable in their response had settled in. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. The record will reflect the demonstration. This court acknowledges its uniqueness, but also its undeniable authenticity. Dana whispered quietly to the jury, "Remember what you've seen. Truth has many forms. Courage does not always speak in words." The session adjourned briefly, leaving the defendant slumped in his chair, defeated. Pierce muttered under his breath, but the weight of reality had settled over them. Emma had changed everything, not with words, not with motion, but with a whisper and a dog who refused to ignore her truth. Outside the courtroom, the reporters filed their stories. Cameras flashed. Social media buzzed. Headlines like 3-year-old and German. Shepherd turned courtroom upside down, and toddler's whisper exposes defendant began circulating instantly. Inside, Emma rested her head briefly against Rex's neck, unaware of the impact she had made. Her mother quietly wiped tears from her eyes, and her father's stoic facade finally softened into a proud smile. They had survived months of fear, months of uncertainty, and now, for the first time, justice seemed within reach. The court would resume. But for this moment, victory hung in the air, not final, but undeniable. Emma had found her voice. Rex had amplified it, and the defendant's facade had begun to crumble. The courtroom had reached a near-epic stillness. Even the murmurs of reporters in the back had dwindled to almost nothing. The jurors sat upright, pens poised, eyes locked on the unfolding drama. The defendant, once brimming with arrogance and confidence, now sat slouched, his hands clenching and unclenching as though trying to hold on to some shred of control that had long since slipped through his fingers. Emma, perched on her small chair, sat with her teddy bear tucked against her chest. Rex lay at her feet, his amber eyes tracking every subtle movement in the room. Though the German shepherd appeared calm, his body was coiled with quiet tension, ready to react at the slightest cue. Emma's fingers brushed his fur lightly, a gesture that seemed to reassure them both. Dana Whitmore, calm and composed, rose once again. She addressed the jury with measured authority. "Members of the jury, today you have witnessed something extraordinary. You've seen a child too young to articulate her own trauma, communicate her perception of danger. You've seen Rex, trained and precise, respond only to her. And you've seen the defendant, whose demeanor has changed markedly in response." The jurors leaned in, hanging on every word. They had seen it themselves, an undeniable shift in the courtroom dynamic, an instinctive truth that no cross-examination could shake. Dana's eyes swept to the defendant, who shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. We are now going to demonstrate, through expert testimony and evidence, the connection between what you witnessed and the actions of the defendant. This is not speculation. This is fact, observable and verifiable. The defense attorney, Randall Pierce, had clearly run out of options. His papers were scattered across the table, a testament to his frantic attempts to regain control. He rose, attempting one final show of authority. Your Honor, the prosecution is manipulating a child to intimidate my client. This is emotional blackmail. We demand this be stopped immediately. Judge Holloway raised a hand, silencing him. Counselor, sit. This court will not be swayed by theatrics or shouting. The court recognizes the unusual circumstances, but the evidence will stand as presented. Proceed. Pierce sank back into his chair, defeated. The next witness, a forensic specialist, approached the stand. She carried a folder of evidence and photographs, ready to connect the defendant to the crime in ways more tangible than whispers and growls. Her testimony would be meticulous, detailed, and damning. Detective Clark, Dana began, addressing the witness. Can you describe the evidence collected at the scene that directly implicates the defendant? Clark's voice was calm, professional, and precise. Yes, ma'am. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the entry door. DNA samples recovered from several surfaces in the home match his. Surveillance footage from a nearby street camera places him near the scene around the time the incident occurred. Additionally, physical evidence confirms a struggle consistent with witness statements. The jury scribbled rapidly, absorbing every word. The weight of factual evidence, combined with the emotional resonance of Rex's demonstration, created a narrative impossible to ignore. Pierce attempted another objection. Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is irrelevant. The dog cannot be considered evidence. Judge Holloway shook his head, exhaling slowly. Counselor, the objection is overruled. The jury will consider all testimony, including demonstrative evidence provided by the prosecution. Proceed. Dana nodded and turned to the jury. You've now heard 2 layers of evidence. Tangible, forensic documentation, and the instinctive, protective response of Rex to Emma. Both are critical to understanding the full scope of the situation. But there is one more step. The bailiff motioned for the defendant to stand. He complied reluctantly, his eyes darting nervously to Rex and Emma. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Dana approached the defendant, maintaining a calm, commanding presence. Sir, you are aware that the child, Emma, has communicated danger through her bond with Rex? The defendant's lips pressed together, jaw tense. He nodded reluctantly, avoiding eye contact. And you understand that this communication has been verified repeatedly by trained professionals, including law enforcement officers and canine handlers? Dana continued. A faint nod. Would you like to speak to the jury directly? To provide your account? Dana asked, her voice steady but soft. The defendant swallowed, his Adam's apple moving nervously. I. His voice cracked. I didn't mean. The words trailed off. He was flustered, stammering under the intensity of the courtroom. Take your time, Judge Holloway interjected, his voice firm but measured. Speak clearly. The defendant closed his eyes, breathing heavily, as if gathering courage. When he opened them again, they were filled not with defiance, but fear and recognition of the inevitability of the truth. I was there, he admitted, voice low and trembling. I didn't hurt anyone. I wanted to scare them. But I didn't mean for it to go this far. A hush fell over the room. Even the jurors leaned forward, sensing the gravity of his admission. Dana nodded, acknowledging the breakthrough. Thank you for your honesty. Can you explain why you reacted when the child whispered to the dog? The defendant's hands trembled. I I didn't expect. The dog, the growl. It scared me. His voice faltered, and he swallowed hard. I panicked. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Rex's ears twitched. He had remained alert, still focused on the defendant, protective and calm. The bond between dog and child was undeniable, and now it had forced the defendant to confront his own fear and guilt publicly. The courtroom was silent, every listener aware that they had just witnessed the defendant's first crack. He was no longer the confident man who had entered the trial weeks ago. He was reduced to a trembling figure, cornered by truth, instinct, and courage. Dana's voice softened, almost empathetic. Your reaction demonstrates why Emma's bond with Rex is so critical. She cannot speak fully, but she can warn, she can protect, and she can survive. The instinctive responses we've observed today are a reflection of the danger she perceived, and you brought. The juror's eyes remained fixed on the defendant. There was no theatrical performance here, no embellishment, only his own admission of fear and guilt, punctuated by the unwavering instincts of a dog protecting a child. Pierce opened his mouth, but found no words. The once formidable attorney realized that every strategy, every argument, had crumbled under the combined weight of instinct, courage, and irrefutable evidence. Emma's father exhaled quietly, relief washing over him. He looked at his daughter, brushing a curl from her forehead, marveling at how a 3-year-old had shifted the balance of an entire courtroom. The judge cleared his throat. The record reflects the defendant's admissions. Counselors, jurors, witnesses, please note the extraordinary circumstances of these proceedings. We will resume after a brief recess. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs echoing down the halls. Reporters filed their stories, many already drafting headlines for the evening news. 3-year-old's whisper forces confession. German Shepherd protects child, exposes defendant. Outside the courtroom, autumn leaves swirled in the crisp air. Emma rested her head against Rex's neck, her small hand stroking his fur. She hummed softly, unaware that she had just been the catalyst for a confession that would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes, holding her own breath as she whispered, "You did it, Emma." Her father placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Brave girl. Braver than anyone in this room. And as the courtroom buzzed with anticipation for the trial's final moments, one truth was undeniable. Emma had found her voice. Rex had amplified it, and the defendant's facade had completely crumbled under the weight of truth and instinct. The courtroom was unusually quiet as the afternoon session resumed. A tension hung in the air, thick and almost tangible, like the moment before a storm breaks. Every juror sat upright, eyes focused, pens poised. The defendant slumped in his chair, shoulders heavy with the weight of his confession. The once confident man was now a hollow shell, subdued by the truth and the unrelenting instincts of a 3-year-old child and her dog. Emma sat perched on her chair, clutching her teddy bear against her chest. Rex lay at her feet, alert yet calm, amber eyes following every subtle movement in the room. He had been Emma's voice, her shield, and her silent witness. Today, he would help finalize the outcome. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, bringing the courtroom to attention. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have now heard all testimony. You have witnessed the extraordinary bond between Emma Collins and her K-9 companion, Rex. You have reviewed forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and the defendant's own admissions. You are charged with determining the facts based on all that has been presented. The jury shuffled their papers, some scribbling notes, others leaning back to process the gravity of the trial. For the first time in weeks, the silence was more than just respectful, it was contemplative. Everyone understood that this trial had transcended ordinary proceedings. Donna Whitmore, the prosecutor, rose once more, calm but resolute. Members of the jury, What you have seen here is unprecedented. You have observed a child who cannot fully articulate her trauma. But you have also seen the instinctive, undeniable truth conveyed through her bond with Rex. Trust me when I say, this is the purest form of evidence you will encounter. Observe not only the facts, but the courage of a 3-year-old who survived fear beyond comprehension. Pierce, the defense attorney, sat rigid, hands clenched. He had tried every conventional tactic, every legal maneuver, every objection, and everyone had been dismantled. The defendant's confession, combined with Rex's consistent responses, left him powerless. The bailiff called the jury forward. They filed into the deliberation room, their expressions serious, some glancing back at Emma and Rex, the witnesses who had so dramatically shifted the trial's trajectory. The door closed behind them, leaving the courtroom in tense silence. Outside, the courthouse buzzed with reporters and onlookers. Cameras flashed, social media feeds lit up, and people whispered the story's details in awe. But inside, Emma rested her head against Rex's neck, her small fingers tangling in his fur. She hummed softly, unaware of the monumental impact she had made. Her mother's hands trembled as she held them together. "She's brave," she whispered to her husband, voice choked with emotion. "She's stronger than we'll ever know," he replied quietly, his eyes fixed on Emma. The jury deliberated for several hours. In that room, their discussions were thorough, examining each piece of evidence, each testimony, each observation of Emma and Rex. They debated the reliability of instinct, the significance of the child's communication, and the undeniable proof presented by law enforcement and forensic specialists. Finally, they returned. The bailiff called the court to order as the jurors filed in, their faces a mixture of solemnity and resolve. Judge Holloway addressed them. "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with steady hands, rose. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The courtroom leaned forward, anticipation crackling in the air like electricity. Reporters held their breaths. Even the defendant seemed to realize the moment of reckoning had arrived. The foreperson cleared her throat. "On the charge of endangering a child and related offenses, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Emma's mother cried quietly, tears streaking her cheeks, relief and disbelief mingling in equal measure. Her father's stoic expression broke, a proud, triumphant smile finally emerging. Rex barked once a short, protective bark and nuzzled Emma. The jurors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in awe. They had witnessed a story unfold that would linger in their minds for years. Judge Holloway's gavel struck. "So ordered. The court thanks the jury for its diligence. Sentencing will be scheduled for a later date." The defendant hung his head, defeated, realizing the weight of justice and the consequences that would follow. His arrogance had been replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of wrongdoing, catalyzed not by intimidation or interrogation, but by the bond between a small child and her dog. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. "Can you comment on the verdict? How did the child communicate danger? Tell us about the dog's role." Emma's mother, still holding her daughter's hand, stepped forward. "My daughter was brave," she said, voice trembling. "She has endured more than any child should, and today, justice has been served." Rex was her voice when she couldn't speak, and he has been a guardian every step of the way. The crowd murmured, reporters scribbled, and cameras clicked. The story spread immediately. 3-year-old and dog secure justice in courtroom drama. Toddler's whisper and German shepherd changed legal history. Back inside, Emma played quietly with her teddy bear, Rex lying beside her like a silent sentinel. Her parents knelt to her level. "You did it, honey," her father whispered. "You were so brave." Emma looked up, eyes wide, not fully understanding the scope of her actions. but aware of the warmth and relief surrounding her. She hugged Rex tightly. The dog rested his head against her shoulder, a loyal companion who had shared in the triumph. Her mother smiled through tears. "Your voice mattered, Emma. Even if it wasn't words, you spoke the truth." The courtroom slowly emptied. Friends and family gathered around Emma, offering congratulations, hugs, and words of admiration. The 3-year-old had changed lives, not through words alone, but through instinct, courage, and the bond with a loyal companion. In the following weeks, the story captured national attention. News outlets, social media, and talk shows celebrated the extraordinary partnership between Emma and Rex. Psychologists praised the therapeutic approach. Law enforcement highlighted the effectiveness of specialized K-9 units, and citizens marveled at the bravery of a tiny girl who had found a voice through a dog. For Emma, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The trauma that had silenced her began to fade, replaced by confidence and a newfound understanding of her own strength. She spoke more frequently, small sentences first, then longer stories. Rex remained by her side, not only as a protector, but as a constant companion who had forever altered the course of justice. Her parents reflected on the journey, realizing that bravery could take many forms. It was not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it relied on the loyalty of a friend with 4 paws. And sometimes it changed the world. On the day of Rex's official commendation, Emma sat proudly beside him. Law enforcement officers, judges, and community members gathered to recognize the dog's extraordinary contribution. Rex received a medal, but more importantly, he received the quiet gratitude of a child whose life he had protected. Emma's parents knelt beside her, tears in their eyes. "We're so proud of you," her mother whispered. Emma leaned against Rex, whispering her little command one last time, not for fear, not for danger, but as a declaration of triumph and trust. The dog responded with a gentle nuzzle, as if to say, "We did it together." In the annals of legal history, the case would be remembered for many reasons: the unusual circumstances, the meticulous evidence, and the extraordinary courage of a child. But more than anything, it would be remembered as a testament to trust, instinct, and the unbreakable bond between a child and her dog. Emma had found her voice. Rex had amplified it. And justice had been served. The courtroom drama ended, but the story endured, a powerful reminder that courage comes in all sizes. And sometimes the smallest among us can change the course of history.